Hello everyone! Spain never mixed European and indigenous names. New Andalusia, New Spain, New Castile, New Leon, New Toledo. Every new echoed the old world, until one day Spain broke that rule, New Mexico. Why would Spain attach new to an indigenous place name? One of the only times Spain did this in the 16th century. Was it imperial deception or a divine quest? And whose divine quest exactly? Join us today as we unravel this mystery and see how empire and myth converge to produce something uniquely American. Much of what we know about Aztlán comes from codices written during the first years of conquest. Among the most vivid is the account of Diego Durán, a Dominican friar in New Spain who spoke Nahuatl and collaborated with Aztec historians to produce the 1581 History of the Indies of New Spain. Through Durán, we glimpse how the Mexica themselves remembered their very own origins. They spoke of an enchanted place called Aztlán, often identified with Chicomóztoc, or the place of seven caves. According to these traditions, the Mexica had once lived far to the north. Why they left their homeland was told in many ways. Some said dynastic strife, others conquest, still others the command of their god Huitzilopochtli. Whatever the reason, they departed with 6 other tribes, 7 pilgrimages in all. According to Durán, after a long journey out of Aztlán, when they landed in Lake Texcoco, he describes a vision given by Huitzilopochtli to the shaman Quaragetski. Quote, "This night our god Huitzilopochtli appeared to me. He commanded that we kill Copil, and from his heart cast into the reeds a cactus has grown, crowned by an eagle. There we shall find our rest, our comfort, and our grandeur. There our Aztec nation will rise, our arms known, our courage praised, our lords ruling from sea to sea. Gold, silver, jewels, and feathers shall be ours, and the peoples will serve us as subjects and tributaries. Our God orders us to call this place Tenochtitlán. Here we shall build the city that is queen over all others, the seat of kings and nobles." Unquote. Now, Aztlán's origins are clouded in myth, and even its very name has been debated. Some said it meant the place of herons, others tied it to white flowers or white rushes. None of these etymologies fit perfectly, but together they reveal a pattern: whiteness and water. Durán himself wrote that Aztlán meant whiteness, making the Mexica the people of whiteness. After all, herons hunt by the water, rushes grow in marshes, all point to an ancestral homeland remembered as a luminous wetland. The Mexica described their world through the concept of the Atepetl, from Ato, meaning water, and Tepetl, meaning mountain. An Atepetl was both a city-state and a sacred hill of water and sustenance, the dwelling place of patron gods who guided migrations and bestowed promised lands. Aztlán was the sacred archetype of the Atepetl, the primordial city-state. It was said to be the dwelling place of the great mother goddess Coatlicue, who promised her children, quote, "Behold, my sons, the virtue of the hill, for we become rejuvenated whenever we so desire," unquote. And the codices depict Aztlán as a city surrounded by water. Now, some scholars argue that this was an echo of Tenochtitlán, anachronistically projected back into the mythical past as a way of legitimizing the Aztec Empire and anchoring it in sacred beginnings. Others tried to locate Aztlán in the real world. Tezozómoc believed Aztlán lay to the north in what is now modern-day New Mexico, the American state. Fernando de Alva believed it was somewhere close to Jalisco, and Diego Durán himself believed that it was perhaps possibly as far east as Florida. And Durán also reveals that even the Mexica themselves did not know where Aztlán truly lay. According to this mythological narrative, Moctezuma I, not the Moctezuma who faced the Spanish, but his predecessor, Moctezuma I longed to find the homeland of his ancestors, the homeland that he knew as Chicomóztoc, or the land of 7 caves. He wished to commune with Coatlicue, the mother of the war god Huitzilopochtli. Not knowing what they might encounter, he assembled the finest warriors from the far reaches of the empire to lead this expedition into the unknown. Men whose martial ferocity was unparalleled, men whose bravery was unmatched, men who were willing to risk anything and everything to bring back the secrets of Aztlán. After all, no one really knew what lay to the north. Perhaps they might encounter the Ahuizotl, a spiny aquatic monster that lured people to their deaths. Or maybe Xibacle, the primeval sea monster, the manifestation of the earth whose hunger brought down the rains. Or maybe they would face off against the Cheneque, an elf-like guardian spirit of nature. But his advisor, Tlacaelel, was like, wait a minute, hold on a second. Addressing Moctezuma, Tlacaelel asked exactly how fearless warriors were going to find a land that was lost to time and hidden by forbidden magic. Instead, he urged to send wizards, sorcerers, and magicians, those who could pierce the fabric of reality and read the threads of time. And so they set out on their very own expedition to the north. They drew magic symbols on the ground and called for divine aid, calling on their gods to reveal the location of Aztlán. Their prayers were answered, and with divine assistance, they were transformed into jaguars, ocelots, birds, and jackals. In these forms, they crossed mountains and lakes until they arrived at a shining city of water, where people farmed and fished in canoes, yet never aged and never died. At its center rose Goacan, the hill where Coatlicue dwelled. As they trekked uphill to deliver gifts, the earth swallowed them whole. They had gotten fat, become victims of their own success. And before them appeared an ancient woman weeping. She was Coatlicue. She cried that her son had abandoned her and she would never know peace until he returned. Frightened and humbled, the Aztec sorcerers explained that Huitzilopochtli is thriving. Tenochtitlán, his city, was now mistress of all Mexico, rich in gold, silver, and feathers. But Coatlicue shook her head, saying, quote, "His time is up. He must return to me. Here in Aztlán there is no death, only regeneration. Come home and you will live forever." Unquote. The sorcerers returned to Moctezuma. They told him they had found Aztlán, a land of abundance and immortality. But that one day Huitzilopochtli would be expelled from Tenochtitlán and return home to Aztlán. The story of the sorcerers' visit reveals that even the Mexica themselves did not know where their ancestral homeland truly was. They likely settled and migrated multiple times over a couple of generations before they reached Mexico, thereby blurring geographical memory. Aztlán became less a fixed location and more of a communal memory passed on through oral traditions. But this uncertainty does not mean Aztlán never existed. Long migrations often sever people from their own roots, and scholars have pointed north to the American Southwest as their most likely homeland. Their clue was the language. The Mexica spoke Nahuatl, part of the vast Uto-Aztecan family of languages whose northernmost branch reaches the Ute of Utah. In fact, the modern-day state name of Utah derives from the name of the Utes, a Native American people, and from the Ute to the Hopi to the Mexica, the chain runs unbroken, a linguistic trail of descent. It is comparable to the Romance languages, Spanish, French, Italian, Romanian, and Portuguese, all distinct yet at the same time descended from a single origin of Latin. In the same way, the Utes, Hopi, and Mexica likely shared a common ancestral culture. One scholar even argued for a very specific location for their homeland, the river junctions of the Green, Colorado, and San Juan in modern-day Utah, arguing that it was most likely a devastating drought that began the migratory process that ended with the establishment of Tenochtitlan. The dream of returning to Aztlán was not just an Aztec dream. The Spanish, too, longed for a city of abundance. Expeditions attempting to find these wealthy cities in the north turned into failed dreams. You had the 1527 Narvaez expedition, which collapsed in disaster. Of the hundreds who set out, only 4 men survived to return. Amongst them was Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca and Esteban Durantes. From Florida, they wandered west, half dead and almost out of hope. As they crossed the Texas plains and entered the interior of what is now northern Mexico, Cabeza de Vaca described a world unlike anything they had seen. People well-fed, well-clothed, living in multi-story permanent towns. These were agricultural communities linked to the great Casas Grandes tradition of northern Mexico, cultural cousins of the Puebloan peoples farther north. Cabeza de Vaca wrote, quote, "We saw many signs of gold, antimony, iron, copper, and other metals," unquote. Their journey here would ignite the imaginations of Spaniards back in Mexico City and help fuel the legends of the Seven Cities of Cíbola. Reports such as these contributed to the making of an American myth, a North American version of South America's legend of El Dorado. The missionary Padre Marcos de Niza set out to find what was rapidly becoming known as the Seven Cities of Gold. And since he was enslaved, Esteban was most likely voluntold to accompany Niza's scouting party. Apparently, Niza heard rumors of a wealthy city to the north, an account which other natives corroborated. These stories seem to have validated his preconceptions. He believed what he wanted to believe, and therefore saw what he wanted to see. Niza instructed Esteban to go ahead of the party and to send back messages in the form of crosses. The larger the cross, the larger the discovery. One day, a cross arrived the size of a man. Apparently, Esteban had reached the homeland of the Zuni people, ruling over cities of stone and their houses rising 4 stories high. But soon thereafter came even darker news. Esteban was dead. Whatever the reason, the Zuni had killed him. Niza told his native allies who accompanied Esteban that God would chastise the Zuni once the emperor found out what had happened. That the emperor would send legions of Christians to punish those who dared to resist Spain's godly authority. From the perspective of Niza, Esteban lived and died like the martyred Saint Sebastian. Shaken, Niza dared not to enter the city. From a safe distance, he saw the settlements of the Zuni and let his imagination do the rest. He wrote of emeralds, pearls, feasts on plates of gold. He proclaimed the 7 cities to be equal to Mexico City itself. From a hilltop, he raised a crucifix of stone and claimed the 7 cities for the Emperor of Spain. The Spanish would return. Esteban and Niza had wandered into the homeland of the Zuni, who called themselves the Ashiwi, and their homeland, Shiwina. From that name, Shiwina, came the Spanish Cíbola, as some scholars have argued. Archaeologists today call this region the Zuni-Cíbola complex, a constellation of various pueblos. The Spanish believed that they had finally found the 7 cities of gold they sought, now known as the 7 cities of Cíbola. But this begs the question, why were the Spanish even looking for 7 cities to begin with? In both Mexica and Spanish traditions, the north was a land of abundance, and the number that marked it was 7. Indeed, the number 7 has deep roots in Western civilization. In ancient Greece, for example, you had the 7 sages of Greece. You also had the Pleiades, the 7 divine daughters. In Christianity, creation was in 7 days, and other numerous countless sevens throughout the Bible. Even in the local regional culture of Iberia, 7 was an important number. There was a Portuguese legend of a phantom island called the Isle of 7 Cities. But as we have seen, 7 was also important for the Mexica. Aztlán was known as Chicomóztoc, and Chicomóztoc was known as the land of 7 caves. Let's look at the word Chicomóztoc itself being made of Chicome, which means 7, and Ostoto, which means cave. Moreover, their own migration involved 7 pilgrimages as the Mexica departed alongside 6 allied tribes. The Aztec and Spanish emphasis on the number 7 represents a cultural synthesis, a convergence. It was cultural syncretism. In much the same way as Mary, Mother of God, combining with Tenochtitlan to become the Americanized Virgin of Guadalupe. It is also similar to how, long before the arrival of any Europeans, the Native Americans of Mesoamerica venerated the eagle, and that combined with the Spanish Habsburg reverence for the eagle, a combination that we see throughout Mexican history. Indeed, as one historian points out, The stories of the Mexica migration out of Aztlán was most likely passed on to the Spanish by word of mouth. The Mexica's oral stories primed the mentalities of Spanish conquistadors, fueling their imaginations. The Spanish came to believe in a wealthy civilization to the north only from the stories of the Mexica themselves. Therefore, Aztec myths became Spanish myths. Mexica beliefs became Spanish beliefs. When myths of Chicomóztoc encountered accounts of the Zuni, the 7 cities of Chicomóztoc became the 7 cities of Cíbola. The Mexica's memory of Aztlán gave birth to Spain's vision of Cíbola. And with this in mind, we begin to see how New Mexico got its name. It's important to note that the New Mexico of the 16th century was not the modern US state nor a fixed province. At this point in time, names and territories shifted constantly. At first, the lands north of New Spain were called Quivira, Cíbola, or Copala. But by the 1560s, conquistadors began to speak of Nuevo Mexico, or New Mexico. New Mexico was less a place in real life and more of a place in the imagination of Spanish conquistadors, of those hoping to get rich. And New Mexico is one of the few, if not only, 16th century examples of the word new preceding an indigenous place name. It's also important to note that in the early stages of the Spanish conquest, the word Mexico did not refer only to the capital of the Aztecs, Tenochtitlán, but rather the entire area that Cortés conquered. In fact, the Spanish at first referred to the indigenous language of Nahuatl as lengua mexicana, or the Mexican language. In addition, it is also important to emphasize that the expeditions to the north of New Spain were heavily attended by Nahuatl speakers. These Mexica expeditionaries described the northern expeditions as Yancuic México, or in their language, New Mexico. In Nahuatl, Yancuic could mean new, but also original or primeval. In other words, Aztlán. The Spanish, however, heard it differently. For them, nuevo meant otro, that is another, a second, a chance to repeat the success. Therefore, the name New Mexico represented optimism, that to the north lay another Mexico, wealthier and more powerful than Tenochtitlán, waiting to be conquered. That is the original source of Aztec riches, abundance, and sophistication. Take, for example, the missionary Pedro de Espinareda. In 1567, he wrote of a great lake surrounded by wealthy towns that he called the White Mexico, echoing Aztlán's old associations with whiteness. The conquistador Francisco de Ibarra and his rich uncle Diego endeavored to search for the, quote, original homeland of the Colwa Mexica, unquote. Now at this point, you might be wondering who the Colwa Mexica are. So, the people we call the Aztecs actually call themselves the Mexica. Specifically, these were the peoples living in Tenochtitlan and its sister city, Tlatelolco. Now, the inhabitants of Tenochtitlan also referred to themselves as Colwa Mexica, in order to emphasize their intermarriage into the illustrious dynasty of the city-state of Culhuacán. And since we are on the topic, the inhabitants of Tenochtitlan also sometimes referred to themselves as Tenocha, with Tenocha and Tenochtitlan both deriving from Tenoch, a revered Aztec ruler from a distant past who historians cannot decide was real or simply mythological. But anyways, back to the point, as I was saying. One eyewitness wrote that Diego de Ibarra was determined to, quote, discover and conquer the New Mexico, unquote, where they believed the Mexica originated from. Baltasar de Obregón's 1584 History of New Spain explained how Hernán Cortés and Viceroy Antonio de Mendoza sought to, quote, discover the origin, root, stock, and advent of the ancient Colwa Mexica, unquote, so that they could bring its people under the mantle of the Catholic faith. For the Spaniards, the ancestors of their empire were the Romans, and that the Mexica were their equals, then surely their ancestors must be as rich and sophisticated as Rome itself. In their search for conquest, the Spaniards absorbed Mexica expectations. The Spanish imagination intertwined with the Mexica imagination. Spanish beliefs became Aztec beliefs. and Aztec myths became Spanish myths. But the bottom line is that the name New Mexico was a product of transculturation. Transculturation being the process by which conquered peoples transform the culture of their conquerors. Though the Spanish claimed to erase Mexica culture, the reality of New Spain was that it was neither Spanish nor Aztec, but a mixture of Spanish and Mexica cultures. And the same could be said for the name of New Mexico. New Mexico was not Mexica, nor was it Spanish, but rather both, that is, something distinctly American.